It is a pleasure to introduce our next instructor joining us here at Best Ideas 2018. Tito Avila is a co-founder of List Capital, which was co-founded in 2014, and is here to share with the MOI global community his unique insights directly from Sao Paulo, Brazil. I'd like to please read an excerpt from an essay that Tito, together with his business partner, have shared with us and is available at MOI Global, entitled Value Investing in Latin America, Adaptability and Survivorship. This is a direct quote from Tito's essay. We at List Capital are value investors of the most traditional kind, always in search of overlooked companies, misunderstood business models, and overestimated risks that generate opportunities for abnormal results achieved through diligent work and patience, since we, being Tito and his business partner, have been doing this together for quite a while, compounding knowledge and hopefully learning from our mistakes. We have learned from experience to adapt and look for margin of safety using different techniques, anywhere in the range of Benjamin Graham's nets to fair-priced, high-quality companies, developing quite a wide array of approaches to value investing. Stepping back for a moment, I'd like to point out that Brazil is potentially a particularly interesting geography at the moment, so it is a very special delight to learn more about this subject directly from a truly local domain expert. On behalf of the MOI Global community, bom dia, and a very warm welcome. Please proceed.
Well, thank you, Shai. Thank you for the opportunity. And on the behalf of List Capital, I'd like to say that it's a real pleasure to be here. We expect to somehow contribute back and give back to the MOI community, fellow value investors, since we've been gaining so much knowledge for many years now, reading articles from your web base. So before we dive into the investment case itself, I'd like to briefly talk about List Capital and then talk a little bit about how we see value investing philosophy in a somewhat different environment, namely Latin America, than might be the case in the US or even Europe. So I'd like to go to the disclaimer part. Although we make our best efforts here in order not to make mistakes, I truly encourage anyone hearing to this to do your own homework. If you, by the end of this presentation, really are interested in investing in this specific case. And we are totally open to discuss any further details it might not be clear during the presentation. So about List Capital, we are value investors of the most ordinary kind, as Shai just said. We are constantly looking for margin of safety with a long-term perspective in Latin American markets. We also believe that a well-defined processes and the discipline to stick to it is one of our major pillars around here. We believe that processes plays an important role, both working as a checklist in the sense that it makes sure that we don't skip important details, be it in the analysis, be it in portfolio managing. But most of all, these systems, these processes, we like to think prevent us from making mistakes. One is more prone under the influence of emotions that arouse our cognitive biases. So for example, it's very common to see that it's very hard to keep your head cool and make rational decisions in a depressed or euphoric market. We also see quite a lot analysts falling in love with their companies. So we believe that processes overall lowers the frequency and also the size of our mistakes. One more important pillar here at List Capital is that we truly believe in the alignment of interests as a central pillar. That means that a big chunk of the fund manager's net worth is and will remain invested in the fund along with our investors base. So in the end, we are eating our own food, and every investment decision can be traced back to the fact that we are choosing where to allocate our own money in the first place. In a simple phrase, we don't aim to make money from our investors, but along with our investor. That's really important here. Last but not least, the fact that the team has been working together for quite a few years. It's important for us because knowing each other and being able to build a collaborative environment is key when it comes to making good investment decisions. The constant discussions and exchange of ideas is fundamental in reaching better investment decisions, we like to think. So moving on to the next section, I would like to briefly explore what we judge are some striking features of Latin America stock market when compared to the US or Europe reality. And those features demand a certain adaptation or fitting when one is trying to put into practice the value investing philosophy. So moving on, first of all, our equity investment universe is indisputably smaller and also more concentrated in fewer economic sectors. For example, if you add up the total number of listed companies in those countries together, Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Colombia, and Peru, you end up with approximately 1,000 companies, listed companies, which represents only 22% of the total number of listed companies in the US market, for example. So it's quite a dramatic difference there. In terms of market capitalization, that number gets even worse. The total market capitalization in US terms of all those countries combined does not even add up to 5% of the more than $24 trillion of US market cap currently. Whereas another point here is that corporations are the exception to the rule when one is talking about Latin America stock market. Whereas in the US, a big portion of the listed companies has a diffuse ownership structure. Around here, more often than not, listed companies are controlled by a singular or a well-defined group of shareholders, what we call family companies. True corporations are uncommon animal around here. So for example, in Peru, on average, the biggest shareholder controls almost 70% of the company. Overall, when one is talking about Latin America stock economies, we have a somewhat more unstable environment down here. For example, I don't think it should be a surprise that the Latin economies are less stable than the American economy, broadly speaking. The causes behind the local instability are many, ranging from less solid institutions, bigger government interference in the economic system, less skilled working force, among many others. But the point one cannot argue with is that we have a more unstable environment, as one can clearly see at this graph here, which illustrates the GDP growth behavior in the last few years. Those economies are much more unstable when compared to the United States. So this environment of economic more instability sort of reinforces the natural manic depressive market nature, leading to a more volatile stock market. So as one can see here, when one compares the stock volatility behavior measured by the VIX, and when one compares it to the IBOV stock index, which is the Brazilian stock market index, one can clearly see that we have more volatility. No one can argue against that. Price oscillations are more frequent and wider around here. Well, given this idiosyncrasies in Latin American stock market, we have come to conclude that adapting the value investing philosophy is very important in order to sustain and advantage long-term returns in Latin stock market. We have three main lessons that we've learned through the years. The first one is that one cannot disregard the macro temperature, be it the politics, be it the fiscal side, etc. So one has to always keep an eye in what's going on in the macro level. We also learned that we must pay an extra attention to governance issues, given the ownership structure here, more focused, more concentrated on family ownership. And we also learn to look for margin of safety using different approaches, such as balance sheet or looking for high quality value compounders. So I'd like to conclude this section by saying that although we have a more unstable economy and more volatile stock market, it can be quite rewarding for those who learn how to best navigate through the cycles. This also works as a higher opportunities for buying low and selling high for those who are able to adapt. Now moving on to the case, I would like to talk about one of our investments, current investments, which is Unipar Carbochloro. So taking a look at the business model, Unipar is the only producer of petroleum and caustic soda, which are both commodities in the Brazilian southeast region. And I must say that the southeast region is the richest region in the country. It concentrates more than 55% of the national GDP. So it's really well located from that standpoint. Those products are distributed to several local clients and industries, since almost every manufacturing production demands caustic soda or petroleum, for example, petrochemical, pulp and paper, and many others. This business model is also marked by a high transportation cost of those products, which works in the way that it reinforces a regional market, especially for chlorine that doesn't travel that good. The price of those products is determined by the cost of the imports, and it's affected mostly by freight costs and also tariffs. And recently, Unipar Carbochloro acquired Solvay Indupa in a verticalization movement, entering the PVC market. So that's an overview of the business model. Now, when we first came across this company, when we started to analyze it, the first sight wasn't encouraging at all. So when talking about the business model, we're talking about a commodity business, which by definition doesn't generate economic profit since it doesn't have competitive advantages. So not exactly the kind of business that we like. And then moving on to the governance, the company had a complicated history of internal dispute among the controlling family group, the Geyer family. So a complicated history among the controlling shareholders. And then the biggest remaining shareholders is also involved in Lava Jato investigation for corruption. And since the shareholder was under investigation, Frank Geyer, decided to temporarily transfer his shares to an investment boutique in a complex agreement that we have never seen before. So it was somewhat difficult to understand what was really going on there. The company also is listed with two different stock classes, which somehow undermine the minority shareholder powers. And last, in a financial standpoint, the company was going through a attempt to take it private again. So the controlling shareholder was trying to buy all the shares from the minority shareholders, which almost automatically creates a misalignment of interests. Since the controlling was trying to buy it at the lowest possible price, and he was using his information asymmetry in order to achieve that. Involved in all that situation, the stock liquidity was really low, and no one was really paying attention to this company, given the really difficult picture that it was involved. Also, the financial statements were really affected by write-offs of an investee company called Texas, a investment that proved to be an ever money-losing business, and other one-offs. And last, there was also the acquisition of Indupa, which back there was a very big company compared to Carbochloro, and Duplo was struggling and a quite leveraged company. So to say the very least, the picture wasn't the most exciting one. But as we started to analyze the case in more depth, motivated by a seeming attractive valuation level, we started to understand and separate the uncertainties from real risks and uncover important risk mitigators that were not appearing on the surface of the case. Little by little, our understanding started to deviate from the consensus. So, as Howard Marks liked to say, in order to make money in the stock market, you have to have a different opinion than that of the consensus. And of course, you have to be right. So although the first side was really discouraging, we decided to move on as we gained more knowledge of the case. So revisiting the business model, we came to understand that the business model was not a pure commodity play. Being the only producer of acrylamide and caustic soda, adding its high transportation costs of those products, and also the difficulty in obtaining a new plant license for another competitor to fight in this region, adding all those qualities together, we came to understand that the business had a somewhat monopolistic power. Also, the fact that the price of those products in Brazil is somewhat protected by the freight costs and also tariffs, it gave the business some sort of a price protection. Also, the fact that there were no one big client, the demand was really fragmented, gave the business some pricing power. And the pricing power can be seen here at this graph here at your right, which shows the Carbochloro gross margin behavior in the last few years and the price of caustic soda variation. So the price of caustic soda is much more volatile than the gross margin, attesting some price protection and some pricing power of the business. So in the end, we came to conclude that actually Carbochloro had a stable margins and cash flows business. It had no need for big capital expenditures, although it had only marginal growth prospects. Those qualities, adding up those qualities, is easy to see that we're talking about a cash cow business, which is always an interesting business to all, we think. Now, moving on to the governance risk. So back then, in early 2007, the Geyer family had a history of disputes among themselves, as we said earlier, and but in the end, one of them, the current controlling shareholder, ended up buying the other shareholders, and it's now a real, very well-defined controlling shareholder. So the family fights is no longer part of the governance issue in this company. Also, as we said before, the company back some years ago decided to invest in Texas, a wind turbine business that has been proved to be an ever-losing money business. But then again, just recently, the company, Unipar, decided to completely divest from this business and finally put an end to this risk. So the controlling shareholder, Frank Geyer, went under investigation for bribery schemes with the government and decided to transfer his shares to a investment boutique. But just recently, he got back in control of the company. So although the controlling shareholder is a controversial one, the company had a cohesive minority shareholders that provided and still provides protection for the minority shareholders. And I must say that the minority shareholders was somehow led by Mr. Barsi, a distinguished local investors who helped to organize the minority shareholders and basically fight against the attempt to take the private company for a very low valuation, as we will see in a moment. Moving on to the financial risks. In the second quarter of 2016, Unipar announced the acquisition of Solvay Indupa, a verticalized competitor with 2 times the carbochloro revenue. So it was a big acquisition back then. The preoccupation, our preoccupation with this movement arise by the fact that it was not being, that Unipar, that Solvay Indupa was not being well managed by its then controller, Solvay. And it could therefore be a problematic operation, plus the possibility of hiding liabilities. Well, the acquisition actually turned out way better than expected. There has been a spectacular margin expansion since the acquisition. The deal itself was a very favorable one, mainly regarding the valuation that carbochloro paid for Indupa. And also Indupa brings many benefits to Unipar operation. We listed here the 3 main ones. The first one is the verticalization that creates extra capacity for caustic soda in the regional market. Also, with this movement, Unipar closed the market for new competitors, since Indupa also produces crinoline and salty caustic soda, and it has a plant operating here in Brazil. So with that movement, carbochloro prevents a competitor from buying that business and starting to compete with carbochloro. So a very wise movement, we think. And the last one is that by acquiring Indupa, carbochloro enters a growth market, the PVC market, which is really attached to the construction sector of the economy. Also, regarding the financial risk, as I said earlier, the company was involved in this attempt by its controlling shareholder to take the company private. And here in Brazil, when the controlling shareholder offers to take the company private, it has to demand a third-party appraisal for the valuation. And when we read the appraisal, we and many other investors came to conclude that the assumptions were really pessimistic ones and even unreal assumptions. So we were not willing to sell our shares at the offered price. On the other hand, the offered price, although a very low one, also worked as a floor for losing money. So when we first invested, we sort of knew the downside size. So in the end, in the third quarter of this year, the controlling group failed in their attempt to take the company private, and that was due to the minority shareholders that voted against it. And immediately, the stock that was really depressed, given its low liquidity and reduced amount of institutional investors, and also the poor financial statements, quickly converged to the price that the minority investors, were asking for. And since then, the relationship of the company with the market has been improving again. So talking about the valuation appraisal made by that third part, here we bring you the main points why we thought that the appraisal was valuing the company really, really low. So for example, when looking at the EBITDA margin for carbochloro, the appraisal was estimating a 25-24 EBITDA margin for the next coming years. And so far this year, the company is operating with a 36% of EBITDA margin, so way higher than the assumptions in the appraisal. For Solvay, pretty much the same thing. So the appraisal assumptions were in the level of 6, 7, 8% in the next coming years. And so far this year, the company is operating at a 12% EBITDA margin. This was possible because the company was not being well managed by its controlling shareholder, Solvay. And once Indupa bought it, it immediately started to look for efficiency gains, and the the operation had a lot of low-hanging fruit, which is now clearly being collected by the new management of Carbochloro. Also, the other assumptions that we did not agree with in the appraisal was the cost of equity and cost of debt assumptions that in our understanding was also unrealistically depressed, since it was moving on to the financial statements. As I said earlier, it was somewhat confusing to read through the numbers here, both because of taxes, write-offs, and impairments in the last quarters results, and also due to Solvay and Dupa asset revaluations. But it's important to say that all these were non-recurrent and non-cash adjustments. Very important from a valuation and understanding the business model standpoint. But since the attempt to take the private company failed, and then the decision to divest from taxes, and now the Indupa consolidation integration, the numbers are becoming more clear. So, for example, in the third quarter, there was almost no one-offs, and this was a very important trigger for this stock. It's clear that the earnings release became more detailed and more transparent also. So, although the stock has considerably appreciated since, we still see an opportunity here, since big chunks of value has been unlocked since, as explained looking at the Carbochloro and Carbochloro and Indupa margins expansions. So we are optimistic with these three main points here. So Solvay Indupa PVC production can absorb more crinoline production from Carbochloro, increasing the caustic soda production, which has a deficitary local market in almost 20%. There has been a caustic soda price spike recently, which is also helping in the results, but we don't consider that in our valuation scenarios. And also there is an ongoing business integration of Unipar and Indupa, which in our understanding can and should create more value looking forward. So here is, of course, one more point that explains why we are, after all this stock appreciation, is still optimistic about this investment. So one can clearly see here that the EV/EBITDA multiple hasn't moved much because although the EV, because as we said earlier, there has been a lot of result gaining. So although the stock has appreciated since the attempt to take the company private failed, the EBITDA has also grown by a big number. Looking forward, we are also optimistic with a potential governance shakeups as a creation of extra value. Also, the Brazilian PVC market is still very limited. It has a lot of room to grow. There is also this new mentality by the controlling shareholder that is now being more transparent with the market in a sort of if you can beat them, join them. Also, the Brazilian economy has just came out of a recession period. So we are facing lowest interest levels. The industry production is finally picking up. So there is a lot of room for the increased demand for caustic soda and crinoline. And also our DCF model points to a comfortable 50% margin of safety. We think this is a very good example of an investment case where the first sight is not an exciting one, but when one is willing to dig deeper and truly understand the risks involved and separate the risks from the uncertainties, when those things are combined, it can be a very good investment opportunity. So with that said, I open the floor to any questions that we may have.
Tito, thank you for sharing such a unique, off the beaten path idea, and even more importantly, how you approach the art of intelligent investing. Thank you. If we could please move back to slide number 16. I'm noticing on the very bottom bullet point your comments about Mr. Barsi, a distinguished local investor. As a local investor yourself, could you share any further color on how you've come to this conclusion and how people at home might learn more about this gentleman?
So Mr. Barsi is sort of a living legend in the Brazilian stock market. He has inspired many others into the value investment philosophy. So Mr. Barsi was born in a poor family, but has now become a billionaire after decades investing in stocks with a value investment mindset. And he's known for his preferences towards good dividend payers companies trading below book value. He's also known here in Brazil for standing up and fighting for minority shareholder rights. He sits on many company boards, as is the case with Unipar and many others. So it's really good to have Mr. Barsi here teaching us about value investing and showing that it can be quite rewarding if one is consistent throughout the years, and it can be quite rewarding.
And if we could please jump to slide number 22. If we could, I'd love to talk through a pre-mortem. Should something go meaningful off track that could have a rather large impact on the thesis, what could you project at the moment has that potential, and how do you think through those hypothetical risk factors?
So the main risk factors that we see in the case are obviously the governance issue. So Frank Iyer is now back as a controlling shareholder, and his past kinds of speaks for itself. So even though we see a low probability of it happening again, given all that we have said so far, and all the mitigators that comes from having an independent board member, and as Mr. Barsi is now, there is always room from some sort of attempt to capture value from the minority shareholders into the hands of the controlling shareholder. Also, in Dupa and its PVC business, we must recognize that it's still a new business that needs to be consolidated, and the management team is also in the learning curve. So there could be problems arising from there. So I would say these are the main issues that we keep a close eye at, but we are quite comfortable given the margin of safety we see in the valuation, and also quite comfortable given the stability of the carbochloro business.
And if we could please move forward one slide to slide number 23. We very much respect that your time is valuable and you've chosen to be here all the way from Brazil to share your unique local expertise. If I could please ask, what type of feedback would you suggest could be most valuable to receive, and in what ways could we as a community return the kindness?
Although we make our best efforts in order to not commit any mistakes, be it an appraisal mistake, be it some sort of data mistakes, we are open-minded. We are 100% open that we may have commit some mistakes. So we are 100% open. If you want to find any kind of mistakes, please feel free to contact us, and we will gladly go through it. One more thing is that we are still growing our asset base. So we are not even close to what we judge to be our full capacity. So if the process that I have described here somehow resonates with someone in the audience, please let us know. It will be our pleasure to keep a conversation here. And the best way to access us, I think, is through the email. Please feel free to drop me an email at tito@leasecapital.com.br, or also feel free to contact us by phone. And in our website, you can find our previous investors' letters, as well as appearances in the media. I think 2 of them are related to the Unipar carbochloro case, in which we wrote some articles along with Mr. Barsi, and it's all there. So feel free to access our website and review our materials.
And I do believe you are based in Sao Paulo. Should anyone listening be passing through town for any reason, would you be open to possibly having coffee?
Yes, 100%. We like very much to meet like-minded value investors. It's always a pleasure to exchange ideas, to exchange mistakes one may have committed. So yes, please feel free to contact us and we will gladly sit and have a coffee together.
On that note, Tito, once again, thank you very much for being here with us at Best Ideas 2018. It is always an honor to learn from you and also to showcase your unique expertise and wisdom. We do see your website, phone number, email. I very much hope the audience will indeed take advantage of the opportunity to learn more and possibly have a local tour guide. So thank you for being here, and we very much hope to see you back in the future.
Thank you, Shai. Thank you, everyone.